A key aspect of understanding soil health and soils on your property is the role of soil testing. And there's a bit of a saying out there, I suppose, that goes, you can't manage what you don't measure. Soil testing's a really important way to understand the nature and the properties of your soils. My name's Brad Costin and I work with Agriculture Victoria as a Land Management Extension Officer. Soils, characteristics and soil properties, they can change at a district level, at a regional level, at a farm level and also at a paddock level. They also vary importantly down the soil profile.
I'm Lisa Warren, I'm an agricultural consultant and I specialise in pasture agronomy and soil test interpretation. So I suppose a lot of people have heard about healthy soils and it's really understanding how do you know if your soil's healthy, and the first place to start is soil testing. So normally that's conventional soil testing at the 0 to 10 centimetre, the topsoil, and there's some key things that we're looking at there which will give us an indication if our soils are healthy. So we're really looking at, is there anything constraining pasture and root growth, and some of those things are commonly the macronutrients, pH can be another one, organic matter, things like that. So there can be structural issues too which we can pick up on a soil test, but often most common things are nutrients and pH issues.
So before you go out and take soil samples for a soil test, it pays to give some thought about why are you testing, what are you testing for. That'll really determine about your sampling and your testing program. So you really want to give some thought as to what paddocks you're going to be testing, the frequency of testing and when you come back to them, collecting your samples from the same paddock and locations, just being consistent. The other thing to keep in mind is making sure you're consistent in the lab that you're using, sending off your soil samples, because there are many tests for some soil properties, so you want to be consistent and use the same tests from the same lab and be consistent with your interpretation or understanding the results of those tests. Many labs offer packages that are suitable for certain states and districts and enterprises, so that can really help in making sure you get the most out of your testing dollar and your effort. There's a great video on soil sampling by Greg Becker and you can find that on the Agriculture Victoria website.
So when you're taking your soil samples and then you're sending them off to the lab, many of the labs will offer a range of options, simple tests, comprehensive tests. If it's the first time you're taking the tests from a paddock, I'd probably select the comprehensive test, which will tell you all about the chemical fertility indicators, the macronutrients, pH, carbon, and also some of the structural indicators such as cations, which will be sodium, calcium, magnesium, those type of things. So I'd tend to get the comprehensive one done as an initial one. But over time, if you're just trying to refine your fertiliser programs or your liming programs, you can just get tested for pH and macronutrients, phosphorus, potassium and sulphur, just to see if you're on track.
Some labs offer interpretation, but that'll only be based on the information you provide them. An agronomist or a farm advisor would know your situation a bit better and tailor the soil test interpretation more to your farm.
So the one thing a soil test is not good for is for diagnosing trace element deficiencies. And in northeast Victoria, north central Victoria, some common trace element deficiencies is molybdenum, maybe copper to a lesser extent, but and maybe boron, particularly for things like lucerne. But molybdenum is the big one for this, for a lot of parts of Victoria. And unfortunately, you can't get moly tested on a soil test. So the best way to pick up if you're pasture, and it's mainly the legumes, the clovers, whether it's subclover or lucerne, if they're deficient in moly, the best way to pick that up is with a leaf analysis. So it's sampling in the spring, sending off actual leaf material to the lab, and that's the best way to pick that up. The other way you can do it is to put out fertiliser test strips. So if you're not sure whether your property has had molybdenum, and the rule of thumb is to have moly every 6 or 7 years. If you're not sure whether the place has had that, then you can put out a test strip of fertiliser, phosphorus fertiliser containing moly, compared to just phosphorus, and see if you get a moly response. But but leaf analysis is the way to go. Pasture renovations are a fairly expensive process. It's economic, but it's a lot of capital cost up front. So if you don't need to go there, if you can improve what you've got through the right fertiliser, lime, grazing systems, that sort of thing, I'd definitely go that way first. And I'm thinking about a lot of country, it's got a lot of native grasses there. So I'd definitely be trying to improve what's there rather than, particularly if it's country that's, it's not arable or it's you can't drive on it easily. The best thing you can do is make sure those native grasses are well maintained, and a lot of that's through careful grazing management and not overgrazing, so rotational grazing systems, and trying to avoid having sheep camps and things like that on the hills. Those native grasses got a really important role to play there. They're drought tolerant, they'll cope with fire, they may not be super grazing tolerant, so that's where the grazing comes in. Some of them don't like a lot of fertility. Things like wallaby grass can cope with some fertilising, where other things like kangaroo grass and spear grass tend to thin out if you start getting the fertility up too high, and they can easily be overgrazed. So just knowing what species are there, and if you're trying to maintain them and improve them, just having the right grazing system and fertility regime to suit those species. Often on farms there'll be the powerhouse land classes on the farm, which might be the flats or the lower slopes, and they would be the areas well suited to pasture improvement and more fertility, and that'll really drive the animal production. There's other land classes on the farm that aren't suitable for pasture renovation, definitely trying to preserve those native pastures in a healthy state and optimise their performance and persistence. The best way to preserve or protect the soil is mainly to just maintain really good ground cover, try and keep 100% ground cover at all times of the year. And that can be achieved with grazing management and having the right species and the right fertility. And the other thing, I suppose, is trying to avoid cultivating. So most situations, there's no need to work up the soil. Direct drilling is a really good technique. So the less soil disturbance, the better really, and that helps maintain the soil biology and the soil structure. If people are looking for more information on understanding soil health and that sort of thing, a really good book to pick up, which I think is available as a PDF on websites, is Understanding Your Soil Test Step by Step by Kathy Botter. That's a really good little book that outlines each of those tests that you get back on your soil test report, and just a bit more information, and looks at the critical values for each of those soil tests. So that's a really good one to have a look at. If the lab is giving you recommendations, you can just go and cross-reference with that little book. There's also a whole heap of information on various websites, and one I've been doing a bit of work with is the MLA Healthy Soils program. They've got a website and they've got a soils hub on their website, which has got a lot of good information about soils, soil health, and also case studies from different producers that are involved in the Healthy Soils program that you can read about.
By having everything working for you, so having good ground cover levels and maintaining good soil organic matter where you can, helps make the most of limited rainfall. So this is all about water use efficiency, making the most out of the water that you get now and into the future, and being efficient with its use.